one last biography to obliterate, and then we will go into that. Our last rare species. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pronounce this correctly. Malcolm's Cryptids, blogspot.com.au, better known by his common name, Malcolm Smith, cryptozoologist, bloggist. When I first wrote that, I thought I had these visions of, a graphic novel out there, Indiana Jones, Laura Croft, Malcolm. And that's kind of how I see this whole night tonight. But Malcolm has an interesting story. He arrived here by way of one of our most iconic creatures, the koala. Or more accurately, studying the behavior of koalas. He's now a retired public servant, so saying that, I see my future in front of me. And he is the author of Bunyips and Bigfoot. Malcolm has spent most of his life in the Brisbane area, but has traveled the globe as a member of what is now the extinct International Society of Cryptozoology. It is something which I think is something like a steampunk adventure novel. So I think you need to start a new organization. I think you need to start the Organization of Extraordinary Cryptozoologists or something like that. These days he's busy blogging articles, reports, and sightings related to cryptozoology, from sea serpents to the abominable snowman here in Australia. I am particularly interested in learning about his theories and the surprising links between the behavior of koalas and bunyips. So that said, Malcolm.
What can I say about an introduction like that? Thank you very much, and I would like to thank the National War Museum for actually bringing me down from Brisbane. So, where to start? Well, what about Corio Bay? It's close enough. In March 1871, some men were collecting ballast on the beach for the ships when some boys pointed out a strange animal coming out of the water. So the men caught it just as it was heading for its nest in the cliff. A nest furnished with stockings, seaweed, sticks, and somebody's leather purse. Said to be a foot and a quarter, that's 38 centimetres long, from nose to tail tip, and looked something like a ferret. It had webbed feet, a tail as thick as 1 second finger, and fur as glossy as a beaver's. Its head was rather flattened, its nose was like a ferret's or a rat's, and its teeth protruded like a rabbit's. They couldn't work out what it was, but they threw it away because they didn't think any naturalists would be interested in it. What on earth was it? Actually, it's identity is perfectly clear. Hydrinus chrysogaster, the water rat. It's a not uncommon native rodent trying to occupy a niche similar to the platypus, and it can be found in the waterways all along the east coast up to the top end of the Northern Territory. I mention this point so that just to show that something which sounds really weird to the onlooker can have quite mundane explanation. But in the 1920s, people started hearing bunyips in the aptly named haunted hills of Gippsland. Loud, gurgling, belching, snoring sounds issuing from the forest at night. A naturalist called Charles Barrett went out to investigate it. And guess what he found? They were the mating calls of male koalas. Not many city slickers know that our little teddy bears carry on like that. But you heard the word bunyip, right? What's a bunyip? No one knows where the word came from. As David pointed out, it's supposed to be the pamphlet written in 1812, which described the bunyip as a large black animal like a seal with a terrible voice which creates terror among the blacks. Well, I haven't been able to confirm that. Apart from that, the word does not appear to have been used before about 1845, and we don't know what language it originated from. Elsewhere, the mysterious monster dwelling in the rivers and the billabongs of New South Wales and Victoria came with quite an unusual variety of names like Canapratia, Waiwi, Catanpie, Tunapie, just to mention a few. So you might be interested in the description of the Pinnet Man, which was of Port Phillip, as described by Mr. Ronald C. Gone in 1847. This is how he described it. The Aborigines, on the other hand, said that it was the size of a bullock with a head and neck like an emu's, and a mane and tail like a horse's. Not a pretty picture to see, but perhaps like one in Australia. In the rude drawings of it, said Mr. Gunn, they gave 2 tusks of front teeth curved downwards and feet like those of a seal. They also said it laid eggs in a cavity which was entered by a tunnel beginning below water level. The eggs were as large as a bucket. The Aborigines also stated, so Mr. Gunn said, that the bunyip ate blackfellas, but his usual food was lobsters and roots. Now, I'd like to stop and think about this for a minute. Suppose an Aborigine were to wander into a white settlement and start asking stupid questions. Isn't it likely that someone would take the view, let's tell the ignorant savage anything? So when a white man starts wandering into an Aboriginal camp and starts asking stupid questions, what do you think is going to be the result? Nevertheless, before we get onto some more mundane materials, I'd like you to hold part of that wild description in your mind. A head and neck like an emu's, and a mane like a horse's. In the rest of Australia, the image of a bunyip is a bit more prosaic. It's usually a sort of nondescript in appearance, and the bellow of roar which the blacks found terrifying. And one suggestion is that the white settlers' cattle had strayed and got into the swamps, and it added to the legend. So they asked one Murray River Aborigine to draw a bunyip in 1848. Let's see if we can get it. How it came up. As you can see, it bears more than the class of the examiners to the board. I wish I'd known about that contest downstairs for bunyips. I could have sent in these genuine bunyip drawings and won the prize. There's more to that though. Bunyips have been sighted by white settlers every 20 or 30 years during the 19th century, and it's logical to assume that the original inhabitants had seen things like that as well. But, for example, in January 1896, the Geelong naturalist published an article by an ex-schoolmaster who's known simply as Mr. Darcy, to describe what had happened to him 24 years ago in Lake Corangamite. He shot a number of ducks at the mouth of the creek, and the current swept them into the lake. Just then, along came a man with a punt. So Mr. Darcy said, "You can have the ducks if you can get them." He went out, but while he was trying, the punt overturned, and he had to swim to shore. The man told Mr. Darcy that he had capsized it in fright because while he was collecting the last duck, I used the words he said, an animal like a big retriever dog with a round head and hardly any ears had come up close to the boat. What on earth was it? And why hasn't it been seen since? Admittedly, that was 24 years before that experience, but just the same, there aren't supposed to be anything remotely resembling such an animal in any Australian lake. So what was it? Well, most authorities believe that sightings like this were of seals, which have somehow got lost in the inland waterways. And certainly the description fits a seal. Also, back in the 1850s, a seal was definitely shot at Conago in New South Wales, about 1,000 miles from the sea. And its remains were stuck and mounted in the Conago pub. Of course, you may have noticed a problem. Lake Corangamite has no outlet to the sea. So how did it get there? I don't know. But anyway, during the 19th century, creatures similar to these were reported all over the inland waterways, even as far north as the Darling Downs in Queensland, and in isolated lakes high up in the centre of Tasmania. So it's obvious something is able to move around. Let's move closer to home, but something a bit more peculiar. You've all heard about William Buckley, haven't you? In 1803, a convict settlement was attempted at Port Phillip Bay, and some of the convicts, including William Buckley, absconded. Bad mistake. Before he came to his senses, the settlement had been abandoned, and he was stuck there. He had Buckley's chance. For the next 32 years, he lived among the Aborigines. Well, he eventually received a pardon and a small pension, and in 1852, his story was ghostwritten by a journalist called John Morgan. It's a rather interesting story, particularly what it doesn't say. The interest of the 19th century was quite different from ours, and the complex social and ritual life of the Aborigines is hardly touched upon, and although a lot of Aboriginal place names are mentioned, not a single Aboriginal person is named. Anyway, the important point for our purposes is what is written at the end of chapter 3, where he describes hunting eels in Lake Morawari. And he adds, I'll quote, "In this lake, as well as in most of the others inland and in the deep river waters, is a very extraordinary amphibious animal which some natives call bunyip, of which I could never see any part except the back, which appeared to be covered with feathers of a dusky grey colour. It seemed to be about the size of a full-grown calf and sometimes larger." By the way, isn't a calf by definition not full-grown? The creatures only appear when the weather is very calm and the water smooth. I could never learn from any of the natives that they had seen either the tail or the head of the tail, so that I could not form a correct idea of their size or what they were like. Then he came back to the subject in chapter 7. The lake he called Gerringott is now called Warren Pools and feeds into the Barwon River. This was supposed to be the haunt of the bunyip, and it filled the natives with terror. They believed it brought sickness and death in its wake. In fact, if one of them saw a bunyip, he'd immediately throw himself on the ground or run panic-stricken into the forest. They believed too that many of the eels in these lagoons had been brought in, supplied for the benefit of the bunyips. They told a story about a woman who was pulling eels out of the lagoon just as fast as her husband could take him back to the camp. But when he got back from the camp, he couldn't find his wife, and she was never seen again. The bunyip had got her. Buckley also claimed to have tried to spear the bunyip on several occasions, and he felt that if he had, the natives would probably have killed him. So, what are we to make of all this? Well, if he's telling the truth, then the word bunyip must come from the language of the North people which lived at this part of Western or Port Phillip, and perhaps it does. But it is germane to point out that by this time the word had become a household name among white Australians. On the other hand, if he'd been completely making it up, I suspect he might have done a better job of it. So it's like I suspect he did see something strange, and he did hear some strange stories, but it's probably embellished quite a bit in transmission. And let's say it's extremely unlikely that there be any large amphibious animal covered with feathers. So let's move a bit further east to Western Port. The bunyip there was called the Turadon, David mentioned that, and an Aboriginal called Currick was asked to draw a picture of it. Now, I'm guessing that Currick hadn't seen too many Turadons in his life. However, he decided he'd humour the white fellow, and he took counsel with a private elder, and he came up with That's the other one I could have won the prize from downstairs. But I suppose he knew what the top part looked like and decided to fill in the bottom part the same way. The local natives described the Turadon as having the head and neck of an emu. So, the bunyips of Lake Corangamite and other inland waters are probably seals. What gives us of these legends of emu-like heads and necks in the inlets to the sea? Well, this brings us to part 2. Sea serpents. What's a sea serpent? It's a large, unidentified marine animal which happens to be elongated. They've been reported approximately one every year for the last few centuries. And they appear to be more than one type. One variety, for example, tends to present as a long row of humps moving vertically with a short head and short neck. Another has a small head and long neck, dare I say it, like an emu's, sticking out of the water like a periscope, and sometimes have been reported as having a mane like a horse's, or like the timid pan of Port Phillip. Sometimes a humpy body is seen behind it, like Dr. Bernard Duvermont. He wrote a book entitled In the Wake of the Sea Serpent, and he recorded 194 of these long-necked sea serpents appearing all over the world. And one of them turned up at Aries Inlet, just 40 kilometres west of here as the crow flies. It was about 3:30 in the afternoon of Sunday, the 3rd of June 1973. 25-year-old Neil Blythe and his then father-in-law Norman Robertson were fishing in a boat about half a mile offshore. It was a dull winter's day with no rain and just a long, high rolling swell. Just before the swell breaks, a distinct hissing sound was audible, but they were a long way from where the swells were breaking when they heard a similar hiss. Suddenly, out of the water, about 50 or 60 metres away, rose a long black serpentine head and neck. Came out at an angle, so it couldn't have been a submarine's periscope. And according to Mr. Blythe, that's Mr. Blythe's drawing of it at the time. According to Mr. Blythe, it was about 9 inches wide and 6 feet high above the surface of the water. But his father-in-law, who thought it was further out, thought it was more like a foot wide and 9 feet high. In the one light, they could see neither eyes, nor scales, nor fur. There was disagreement about whether the head was blunt or whether it tapered like a dog's, but it was certain that there was no separation between head and neck. They just merged into one another. This strange shape stood upright for about 3 seconds, then simply sank back into the water without any splash. It didn't die. They waited for about a quarter of an hour and then rowed to shore and immediately called the press. The experience obviously made an impression on the witnesses because they were independently able to provide me with more information than I contacted them 14 years later. And it's worth noting that a woman at the Aries Inlet store, about 400 metres inland, happened to see a dark shape moving below the surface parallel to the shore. Now, lest you imagine that this was a one-off, I should like to add that when the news hit the press, the journalists made vague, veiled references to something similar off Gaybo Island, just off the land junction of New South Wales and Victoria. I've never been able to find the actual original reference, but it appears that the lighthouse keeper saw something which was either a sea serpent or a submarine, so I presume it was something similar to this. And in addition, I'll give you a list here, exactly the same thing rose out of the water off Green Island near Cairns in 1924. It was about 15 inches wide and 9 feet high, and only a couple of oars length away from the witnesses. Just about where I was sitting. The same thing turned up at Burham Heads in southeast Queensland in 1995. In both these cases, the witnesses were so scared of ridicule they remained anonymous. And in 1916, another long-necked sea serpent appeared off Melville Island in the Northern Territory. This time, with a long row of humps behind it. The witnesses hit it with an oar and ended up with a few teeth embedded in the timber. In 1925, the crew of the ship saw a long-necked, swan-like sea serpent with a long body and a tall fin off the coast of Fort Stevens. In 1939, a sea serpent was seen from a warship off Western Australia. It was about 90 feet long, and its long neck bore a pattern like a giraffe's. In the late 1940s, a long-necked sea serpent with a visible body turned up near Darwin. And finally, in 1962, a witness saw off the coast of Bribie Island near Brisbane, an animal described as, quote, a whitish grey in colour, about 12 feet long, and it seemed to have a swan's neck and a whale's body and a fish's tail and fins. So, there you are, ladies and gentlemen. I hope next time you wander down to the seashore or along an inland waterway, you'll appreciate the world as a stranger place than you first imagined. Now, before we go away, I run a number of blogs. That's the blog. If you want to write it down, I'll be putting this on the internet for the next week or so. And you'll find there's a lot of other interesting things about sea serpents and other strange things in Australia as well. Thank you very much.
Does anybody have any questions for Malcolm? Or for David? Or for Simon?
Well, I just had a question. Are there any zoological theories about the nature of the animals?
Quite a few, none of which I agree with. The ones which long row of humps, usually with a relatively short neck, they move vertically. A vertical movement can only be a mammal. Suggestion that it's an archaic type of whale because there used to be long serpentine-shaped whales. The ones with the long necks, well, if you believe in plesiosaurs, you can accept that, but there are a little problems involved. Elasmosaurs, which are the long neck ones you normally think of, they probably couldn't stick their necks out of the water like that. They probably had to chase after fish, which are now much faster since the teleos have evolved. They didn't have a humpy body behind them. Also, they were cold-blooded reptiles. Now, I know that quite a few of the dinosaurs were probably warm-blooded, but get this straight, they found out in the Caribbean seas in the Cretaceous period, the temperature was 37 degrees, blood heat. A cold-blooded animal swimming in there would be just as having the same body temperature as us. A mammal swimming in there would very quickly become heat stressed. These things have been seen in quite cold waters. Also, be prepared to believe that things like this are in places like Loch Ness. Well, Loch Ness is a very cold lake. Also, this is a big problem I have with some of the theories about lake monsters. They've got to come up to breathe, and they aren't seen often enough. Yeah, so I don't know what it is. Somebody else came up with a theory of a long-necked seal. A lot of problems involved in that. One of them is the seals have to come on land to breathe. So, I don't know what they are. Any other questions? Yes?
No, just an observation that's relevant to the first one you were talking about the sighing sound, and then the immediate vertical eruption of what appeared to be a neck. John Turner, my colleague who you've heard of, he was fishing on Barnum Head's estuary just locally a couple of years ago, and he was contemplating whiting and nothing else when he heard a sighing sound. He turned around and the orcas, Frankus, kilowatt, a lot of them were coming through. And they're very intelligent beasts. One came up not too far away from his boat at all, and it was a bull, of course, because they tend to be sort of feral. They're not so much aggressive, but you know they look after the moss. The neck came out the dorsal fin just came up, and of course, as it exhaled, it sighed. But it also rolled on its side, had one look at him, and then disappeared again. But the fact was that fin is 6 to 7 feet long. And it gives, it's very straight. It could give the impression, I'm not saying there are no sea monsters, far from it, but I think sometimes people, when they mention the sighing sound, and I know it crops up in Herbert's book, it might be something to do with cetaceans, I don't know. But by the same token, it's just too much consistency involved with the books.
Yeah, I limited these stories to basically this general region, but there was a case near Swan Hill, up near the Murray, where someone saw a strange creature in the water, and it spouted water from its neck. and they came back together and shone the light on it and whistled incredibly loudly. I thought, what on earth is that? Now, I put my theory in there. My theory is this, I'm pretty sure it's correct, right? It probably wasn't a seal which got lost in there, it was probably a porpoise or maybe a big whale, because, well, you don't often see their spout, but if you did, which come out from what appears to be their neck. Also, when they are stressed, they whistle. Any other questions? Yes?
Not so much a question to you, but just to the audience. I'm just interested to know how many people here have had an experience with any show of hands.
Anyone want to tell us what they are?
I would like to make one quick observation before I go into what I was going to say, is that you mentioned that you don't think Loch Ness, it would be seen more often.
Yeah.
And I would just point out that there is another creature with humps that can actually drink water and then not have to do that again for 6 months. So if there was a physical ability to do the same thing with air, clearly that's very hypothetical, but I'm just pointing that out. It's a very strange world, that's all. Yeah, I had...
The platypus, that's all I'm
But yeah, I saw a, whatever is hanging around the Otways, was making walking tracks. So it was a fresh piece of bush that we'd cut a track through. We'd been doing that for around about 6 weeks at the time. We'd got halfway between Moonlight Head and the Gable, and hiking down to site one day, I encountered one right in the middle of the track. I think it was probably wondering what the hell was going on, and it would have been 5 metres at the absolute most away, and just the three features that really just, I got in quite an argument with the parks guy about it afterwards, because he kept trying to tell me it was a feral cat, which I'd see almost daily doing what we were doing, or a wallaby, which we also saw almost daily. Like it's the three features were the eyes, the shoulders, and the tail. You just cannot forget those three things. That was the big thing. Just the muscles in the shoulders were just amazing, beautiful. The eyes were scary, and you always hear the term that they were more scared of you than you are of them. I did not detect a single piece of fear in his eyes. I've never, just dead calm in it, and it didn't move. I got the real privilege of actually looking at eye to eye for probably about 1 second before it turned and walked off. It didn't run. And then people come stumbling up behind me with tools, and you could hear it dart off, and it did follow us for a period of about 50 metres. People saw the flashes behind the trees, but no one else got to see it up close, which was, it was, my heart's even beating right now, just remembering the look in the eyes. And that was 16 years ago.
And you feel privileged?
Absolutely privileged. I actually got to look it in the eye. It's extraordinary, and I'd love to do it again.
Simon, it seems like you want to say something.
Oh, no,
You're just listening.
I think it's exactly that gut feeling. That gut feeling is really important. That's visceral. That's you being a primate. It's you saying, I don't like the look of this. I really don't. I mean, and also it is an interesting phenomenon in its own right and everything else, but it's real for those that see it. And you put that so succinctly. I'd like to ask you a big favour of you. Please go to my website and make it.
I've seen your website. Actually, I was on there last night looking through all the pictures.
Oh,
and
really?
having a read.
Well, the gist of the matter is that, okay, no one needs to tell you what you saw. You know what you saw. It's getting some vindication, and it's a big deal tonight. I'm sure there's other people here that have seen things that wouldn't like to talk about it, and I don't blame them. But what you said just it gives me the impetus to keep going and trying to get more information. It's really worth it. We might have an environmental disaster in 100 years because of this, or we might not. We might be sitting on some fantastic genetics that are worth protecting. We don't know until we know more about it.
I should point out this is one of the reasons why what some people think of cryptozoology being a pseudoscience, it has to be taken seriously because on one hand you could be having dangerous exotic animals coming in and destroying the environment. On the other hand, there may be quite rare native animals which are going extinct while we haven't even noticed they exist. Incidentally, on that website there's a button which says how to report a sighting.
Yeah, and that was, I actually tried to report a sighting because we were working underneath Parks Victoria and ended up in a very long, elongated argument with the Parks guy who didn't want to take the report, and he'd explained to me that he strongly discouraged many people from doing the same thing. And that was a bit sad. I realise that now how much of a mistake it was, because at the time it was a freshly cut track. We had areas where there was a lot of loose dirt and stuff. Getting a footprint would have been probably likely more than anything.
Really, collecting any sort of data like that is really difficult. You can't do it at a whim.
That being said, even so, because I put all my research data and the research data from my book up there, if you see them, I put all that in the Geoffrey Blaney collection at the University of Ballarat, including footprints that were submitted to Melbourne Zoo and all that sort of thing. But from Parks Victoria, I've got like a pile there, it's like about almost an inch thick of reports of that kind of thing. And that's even given that there was a culture of discouragement. But nonetheless, you've got rangers and police officers and all sorts writing these reports and sending them to the Victorian government.
That Geoffrey Blaney stuff, is that only available at the university, or is that available
you
via
have
web?
to view it at the university. They're slowly digitising things, but it's by a volunteer basis.
Right.
But the collection is, if you go to the university library up there, usually good to phone ahead so they know you're there. They can give you access to all the files and you just have a look through it. And there's several boxes there of big gov stuff, newspaper stuff, tracks and that sort of thing.
For those of you who are interested, and if you don't have a pen and you don't have the ability to take down some of these websites, we will put a link on our website at the National Wool Museum under the Twilight Muster event, and we will link to all of their websites, to Malcolm's blog and to your site and to yours, and we will we will get that on probably by end of day tomorrow, but it's pretty easy to Google National Wool Museum, but it's nwn.vic.gov.au, and that will take you into our website, and then through the Twilight Muster we'll put in links to all of their websites.